bands survive everything. Lineup changes, label drama, decades of touring, personal tragedy. But there is one change that can quietly break a band in two. The moment a new voice steps up to the microphone and nothing sounds the same. This list looks at 12 rock bands whose identity, momentum, or legacy took a serious hit when a new lead singer stepped in. If the history of rock music speaks to you, consider subscribing so you never miss a video like this. Number 12. Van Halen. For most of the 1970s and all of the early 1980s, Van Halen meant one thing: David Lee Roth. Flamboyant, unpredictable, and impossible to ignore, Roth was the engine of the band's personality. When he departed in 1985, the band brought in Sammy Hagar, and the hits kept coming. But they were softer hits. Polished, radio-friendly, and missing the reckless electricity that made albums like their debut feel like lightning in a bottle. Longtime fans were divided almost immediately.
But don't talk much about it. Do things get out of control?
Hagar was a capable singer. That was never the question. The question was whether Van Halen was still Van Halen, or just a very successful rock band wearing a familiar name. Consider what was lost in the handoff. Songs like Panama and Hot for Teacher carried a specific swagger, a sense that the whole thing might collapse spectacularly at any moment. And that was the appeal. Hagar's biggest contributions to the catalog, Why Can't This Be Love and When It's Love, were competent arena rock with none of that danger. The band sold millions of records with Hagar through the late 80s and into the 90s, but the critical reputation that had made their 1978 debut one of the most celebrated hard rock records of its generation never fully transferred. Number 11. ACDC. Bon Scott was not just a frontman. He was the attitude, the swagger, and the barely contained chaos that made early ACDC recordings feel genuinely dangerous. When he died in February of 1980, the loss seemed unsurvivable. Brian Johnson stepped in, and the band released Back in Black later that same year, one of the best-selling rock albums ever recorded. By commercial measures, the transition was a triumph. Back in Black has sold an estimated 50 million copies worldwide, making it the second best-selling album in history behind only Thriller. Those numbers tell one story, but a portion of the fan base never fully accepted it. For them, the Scott era had a rawness that the Johnson records, polished and stadium-ready, never quite recaptured. Scott's work on Highway to Hell in 1979 had a looseness and a leer that felt genuinely threatening. Johnson's voice was powerful, but it arrived already calibrated for arenas. The band carried on brilliantly. Whether it was the same band is still debated. Number 10. Journey. Steve Perry's voice was, for many listeners, the sound of American radio rock in the late 1970s and the 1980s. Powerful, emotional, and instantly recognizable, it anchored some of the most beloved ballads of the era. When Perry stepped away from touring in the mid-1990s and eventually parted from the band, Journey cycled through replacement singers before landing on Arnel Pineda, discovered through YouTube videos in 2007. Pineda is a genuinely gifted vocalist and deserves enormous credit. But for a generation who grew up with Perry, the concerts felt like an imitation of a memory. The songs remained. The feeling was different. Perry's absence had already cost the band significantly through the 1990s. Their 1996 album, Trial by Fire, recorded with Perry returning briefly, stalled when he refused to tour citing hip problems, and the band moved forward without him. Pineda first appeared fronting a Filipino cover band called Zoo, and his technical mimicry of Perry is remarkable. But mimicry of a beloved voice is its own quiet tragedy. Number 9. Deep Purple. Deep Purple's history is a revolving door of lineups, but the most painful departure for many fans was Ian Gillan's exit and the subsequent arrival of David Coverdale in 1973. Coverdale brought a bluesier, heavier style that suited the band's direction at the time. The records he made with Deep Purple, particularly Burn, are well regarded. But the frenetic energy of the Machine Head lineup, with Gillan screaming over Ritchie Blackmore's riffs, felt like a different and irreplaceable era.
She was a dancer, but none of us a chancer, because she was a Sam.
Machine Head, released in 1972, gave the world Smoke on the Water, one of the most recognizable guitar riffs ever committed to tape. That album's momentum was enormous, and Gillan's departure just a year later, driven by internal tensions and creative exhaustion, arrived before the band had fully consolidated what they had built. Coverdale's Burn in 1974 was strong, but the audience was already split. The band's identity shifted enough that fans began referring to the lineups by number, a telling sign that continuity had fractured. Number 8. Black Sabbath. Ozzy Osbourne was Black Sabbath, the voice, the image, the mythology. When the band parted ways with him around 1979, they eventually recruited Ronnie James Dio, a technically superior vocalist by most professional assessments. The Heaven and Hell album from 1980 proved the band could still produce powerful music. But Sabbath without Ozzy confused casual fans and disappointed purists. Dio-era Sabbath was a different beast, more melodic, more polished, more overtly heavy metal in a classical sense. For listeners who had followed the band since the early 1970s, the primal sludge and occult unease of the Ozzy years was gone, replaced by something more controlled. The band fractured its audience for years. Dio himself acknowledged the challenge in interviews, noting that he was not trying to replace Ozzy, but simply to do something new with the band's framework. That honest framing helped somewhat, but when Sabbath's reunion tours reunited Osbourne with his original bandmates, beginning in earnest in the late 90s, the reception confirmed what the sales figures had already suggested. The audience wanted the original. Number 7. The Doors. When Jim Morrison died in Paris in July of 1971, the remaining members of The Doors attempted to continue as a trio, with Ray Manzarek and Robbie Krieger sharing vocal duties across 2 albums released in the early 1970s. The results were, by most accounts, disappointing. The records sold poorly and were largely dismissed by critics. Other voices in 1971 and Full Circle in 1972 were commercial and critical failures, each selling a fraction of what the band's Morrison-era albums had achieved. Morrison had been more than a singer. He was a poet, a provocateur, and a presence that the music literally seemed to require. Without him, the band discovered that what they had was not simply a rock group with a good singer, but a singular collaboration that could not be replicated. They dissolved quietly in 1973. Number 6. Judas Priest. Rob Halford defined the voice of heavy metal for millions of listeners. His operatic range, his leather-clad stage presence, and his ability to hit notes that seemed physically impossible shaped an entire genre. When he left Judas Priest in the early 1990s, the band auditioned and hired Tim Owens, an unknown singer from Ohio who had been performing in a Judas Priest tribute band. The story was compelling enough to inspire a film. Rockstar, released in 2001 and starring Mark Wahlberg, was loosely based on Owens' journey. But the albums Owens recorded with Priest, Jugulator, and Demolition were divisive. Jugulator, released in 1997, leaned into a heavier, more modern sound that alienated listeners who associated the band with the melodic power of Screaming for Vengeance or Defenders of the Faith. Many fans felt the band had lost its center. When Halford returned in 2003, the reunion was met with enormous relief, which said everything about how the Owens years had landed.
The hand of justice, telling wrong from right.
Before we continue, drop a comment and let us know where you are watching from. We love hearing from viewers all over the world. Number 5. Fleetwood Mac.
and you cry, but she's gone and your life knows no answer.
Fleetwood Mac, before Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham joined in 1975, was a blues rock outfit with a devoted but limited following. The California pop sound Nicks and Buckingham brought transformed the band into one of the biggest acts in the world. When Buckingham departed in 1987 and the band continued without him, then when Nicks came and went over the years, each version of the group felt slightly less essential.
And what you had, ooh, what you love.
The band that recorded Rumors was a specific, unrepeatable chemistry. Every configuration that followed, however talented, reminded audiences of something they had lost. Rumors, released in February of 1977, spent 31 weeks at #1 on the Billboard charts and has sold over 40 million copies. The interpersonal tensions that fueled it, Nicks and Buckingham's breakup, the divorces of John and Christine McVie were baked into every track. No lineup change could manufacture that kind of emotional specificity. Number 4. Yes. John Anderson's voice is one of the most distinctive instruments in progressive rock history. High, pure, and almost ethereal, it gave Yes an otherworldly quality that suited their complex, sprawling compositions perfectly. Anderson's various departures from the band over the decades and the revolving cast of replacements that followed left many fans perpetually unsettled.
Clear design on your liberty. Can't believe
When Anderson and the band had a serious split around 2008, and the remaining members continued touring under the Yes name with different singers, the situation became contentious. Fans debated loudly, sometimes bitterly, about whether what they were watching on stage had any legitimate claim to the name. It was a slow, protracted unraveling. Number 3. INXS. Michael Hutchence was not just INXS's singer. He was their entire visual and emotional identity. Charismatic in a way that came across equally on stage and on screen, his death in November of 1997 left the band in an impossible position. After years away, they held a globally televised talent competition in 2005 to find a new lead singer, ultimately selecting Canadian rock musician J.D. Fortune. The new version of the band released one album and toured for a period before quietly dissolving. The experiment made for compelling television, but it demonstrated something the band probably already knew. You cannot hold an audition to replace the irreplaceable. The audience tuned in for the search and then mostly moved on. Are you a fan of classic rock history? Let us know in the comments which of these transitions hit you the hardest. Number 2. Stone Temple Pilots. Scott Weiland was a complicated figure whose personal struggles were well documented over the years, but his voice and his stage presence were central to everything Stone Temple Pilots recorded and performed. When the band parted ways with him, they tried the replacement route twice, first with Linkin Park's Chester Bennington for a period, and later with Jeff Gutt after Weiland's death in 2015. Bennington brought his own loyal following and genuine talent. Gutt is a skilled performer. But the band with either man was a different proposition than the one that recorded Core and Purple in the 1990s. The audience recognized the songs, but felt the weight had shifted. Stone Temple Pilots became, for many listeners, a legacy act performing someone else's memory. Core, released in September of 1992, sold 8 million copies in the United States alone. Weiland's baritone drawl on tracks like Creep and Plush carried a specific melancholy that Gutt, despite his obvious vocal skill, could never organically inhabit. When Weiland died in December of 2015 at age 48, whatever slim chance remained of a definitive reunion closed permanently. Number 1. Sublime. Bradley Nowell founded Sublime, wrote most of their songs, and was the irreplaceable center of everything the band represented. He died in May of 1996, just weeks before their self-titled major label album brought the band to a massive national audience. For over a decade, the name Sublime belonged to that catalog and nothing else.
Match you never seen before. Light skin, light blue eyes, a double chin and a
When surviving members reformed and eventually recorded new music under the name Sublime with Rome, featuring vocalist Rome Ramirez, the movie year was met with mixed emotions. Ramirez is a likable performer and clearly loves the music. But there is something tender about Sublime's legacy, something tied to a specific young man in Long Beach in a very specific time. Nowell was 28 years old when he died of a heroin overdose in a San Francisco hotel room, and the self-titled album that made him posthumously famous reached number 13 on the Billboard 200 and eventually sold over 5 million copies in the United States. Those numbers arrived after his death, meaning he never witnessed the full scale of what he had created.
maybe it's just the way you move.
The songs endure. They always will. And perhaps that is exactly how some stories should end, not with a replacement, but with the music itself carrying the memory forward.